Today, I am happy to welcome back to the podcast Martina Lauchengco. Martina is a partner at SVPG and author of the book Loved. Martina has spent over 25 years as a marketing and product executive. She's been building, branding, launching, some defining software like Microsoft, Netscape, Cloud. Martina is also an operating partner at Christian Ventures, and she's served on over a dozen boards in B2B and B2C startups. Today, we're going to dive into the world of startups. We'll discuss who is best suited to create a startup, how to join a startup, what level of experience you should have, the pros and cons of being part of a startup, whether you're considering joining a startup or you have an idea and you want to create your own startup. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Martina, it is super great to have you back on Product Therapy.
Thank you, Christian. It's always great to be here.
Wonderful. Look, this episode is different and very important because I often coach many people that come to me saying, I have a great idea. Do you think I should do a startup? Or I'm considering joining a startup. What are the risks? What should I look for? So I'm also sure you get a lot of these questions, Martina. So why don't we start there? When do I know I should start my own company?
Yeah, I do. I get those questions all the time. And I would say ideas are a dime a dozen. There are so many ideas. And so it's not, did you come up with a novel idea? But then did you take it through the paces of pressure testing it within the market? Product building is easy these days. The much harder part is how do you take whatever you've envisioned and will it actually carry through in the market? I've worked at Christian Ventures the last 10 years. The biggest thing I observed were early stage. So this is like from PowerPoint to actually putting their first version of a product out in the market without exception. The idea as it originates and what actually hits the market initially, there's always unanticipated change. And so the skill set for starting a startup is not, do you have a really interesting idea? It's, do you have the determination to really work with customers to discover what the market need is, whether or not this will be valued, whether or not it will be valued coming from you. That's the harder part. And so ask yourself if that work excites you, because that's the larger, harder work when it comes to startups.
Oh, I love that framing a lot. You're kind of saying, am I ready to do a startup? Having a great idea is not the real test. Is, do you have the grit, the persistence, the determination to go through the many iterations, the many experiments to test and figure out what you will actually bring to market?
Yes.
You're calling out that difference between your idea is not the business, it's not the startup. There's a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the other thing that, especially people who come from product, because we're exposed to product all the time and we're like, oh, this would be a much better product. That's not a business. And startups are taking an idea of solving a problem through product, but building a business. And so when you get funded by a VC, it's not like, that idea is awesome. It's, in your idea, I see the kernel of a great business. Not a good business, a great one. And that's the other thing most people don't quite understand when it comes to startups, because it looks like, well, everyone gets VC funding. You just need to have an idea. It's that we genuinely see that this can be an exceptional business that is going to give all of its investors an exceptional return. So that's the part of the calculus that nobody really talks about, but winds up actually being the much bigger challenge for most people who bring their ideas to VCs.
You're kind of determining what the difference is between a great idea and a great business, and you're funding a business. How do I test my readiness? How do I know as an individual, like, can I assess my readiness to, I am ready to do the work? I mean, it sounds good in theory, just in my head. Like, of course, I love my idea. I love the problem enough. But how can I really tell I am ready?
The biggest thing is to actually bring your idea as precious and special as you think it is. And I'll see this happen a lot where people are like, ooh, it's such a special idea. I don't want to tell anyone because then somebody else might do it or somebody's going to copy it. I'm like, if you're not prepared to talk to 100 people to pressure test your idea, do not take your idea to a VC, because that's the first thing they're going to ask you. You're like, well, who have you put this in front of? And what's their reaction been? And how much has it evolved? Because if you also aren't evolving your idea in response to what you hear and learn from the market, you're being way too rigid about how you believe you should be solving a problem. There's no good idea, no good product that hasn't been bettered by the process of learning from the market, getting some feedback. I once worked with an entrepreneur that would just draw on his iPad ideas of what he thought the interface would look like for solving this really big problem. He went through 100 different iterations, just hand-drawn on his iPad, and he would show it to people, and he would say, go ahead, just draw in what you wish was there. And he learned so much just in a matter of months by putting everything out there and getting real people to reflect on, how might I actually use this in my job? I'd say one other really critical thing that most product people don't tend to think of, because we think of like from a product purist perspective, is these days you are displacing an existing product or an existing behavior. That is really hard to do. So people might be nice, they might be curious, but will they actually abandon the way they do it now? Is this that much better that they're willing to absorb the consequences of change, which means it's not just your department, it's everyone else that interacts with you. For taking on a new tool or a new product, everyone that actually adopts a new product has to think about those things.
There's a lot of wisdom to unpack in just this last minute here, because I do meet people all the time that come with, I have a great idea. I'm so afraid of sharing it because somebody will steal my idea, or it's so cool. And I'm always trying to coach people like, it's very rare that it's a new problem in the world. And it's also very well that there's nobody doing anything about it.
Exactly.
But and people tend to minimize the alternative, They are only using Excel. I'm like, Excel? You mean that super powerful tool that people have customized and mastered for years?
Exactly. It's like the most powerful, most used developer tool on the planet.
They just minimize it like they are doing this and that's only what they are doing. And I say, hold up. And I love that idea of like, it's not that many people have not found the problem. What solving is, whatever their solution is, it's not compelling enough for people to switch or change behavior and stop doing what they are doing and start doing what you're proposing.
It's so funny you brought up Excel, Christian, because this particular entrepreneur, what he found was everything was being managed. He was actually dealing with supply chain, people who were working in the supply chain departments. And he's like, they do 85% of their work in Excel and email. And they have these huge ERP systems, which companies are spending millions of dollars supporting every year, that are supposed to be the systems of record where all the supply chain is magically getting managed somewhere. And it turns out that the actual day-to-day work is not happening there because it's too hard. And so he was trying to solve the actual day-to-day problem. And I'd say that's a perfect example of, we tend to say like, oh, well, that problem's already been solved. Or look, they're only using lowest common denominator tools, therefore they're going to prefer an alternative. It's like the reason why they keep falling back to lowest common denominator, email, Excel, spreadsheets, whatever it is because it's just way easier. And they always default to easy.
I think it's either Mark Andreessen or Ben Harris that called out like they have to perceive your solution as like 9 to 10 times.
Yes, that's a high bar. Speaking as someone that has worked on all sides of this equation, it's easy to believe that what you're doing, because you believe it's 10 times better, and it might be technically 10 times better if you know exactly what you're doing. No one ever examines it in that pristine environment. They always have to look at it like, this might be 10 times better, but then what else needs to change that will cause friction or make this difficult or make collaborating with my department different than it was before? And is that 10 times better worth that pain?
I like the way I'll frame this question in my head. Is like, I'm not asking somebody if they have a great idea to do a startup. I'm kind of asking them, are you ready to discover something that is 10 times better?
And are you willing to be humble enough to ask? And like with whatever you put it, where someone says like, yeah, that's really, really interesting, I wouldn't switch. Like you have to be willing to ask that question. Say, would you switch? Would you put money behind this? And hear bad news. Or hear people say like, I'm super intrigued. I'm super, like this happened actually. One of our startups, early stage, we put it in front of the CISO of Walmart. And he was like, oh my God, game-changing technology, totally amazing. And we're like, that's great. But then when push came to shove, was he actually willing to spend money on it? No, even though he loved the technology, he said, this is one of the best things I've ever seen. And that was really illuminating for us on the VC side, saying like, just because someone thinks something, it's from a diligence perspective, it could be the most interesting thing the person's ever seen. If they're not willing to spend money on it, that's meaningful. So when you think this through, that's the most important part. Is your market or someone of consequence willing to spend money on the thing that you are providing or whatever it happens to be?
That's the first value test. Now, I don't want to ignore the human skill or the human side or the profile of what makes a great startup founder. What's the profile, the prerequisite, the experience? Are they indicators that when you talk to somebody, you meet somebody, you're like, this is a profile of someone that can do a startup or should do a startup?
Yeah. Oh, it's so fun. I was just telling Christian before we started recording, I'm like, I just talked to this candidate who is awesome and was so the profile of who you want to see in the startup. The single most important thing is growth mindset. And it's because they have to remain curious because markets change, technology change. What you thought was a great way to solve a problem might shift like 10 years in. You're not yet a public company, and you have to be humble enough to say the market's changed. We have to completely revisit our product strategy. We might have had the wrong go-to-market partnerships, and you have to be willing to adapt to that and not just cling to what you believe to be true. And so the capacity to listen and adapt to the realities that are in front of you, that's the most important skill to be in an early stage startup. I'm defining early stage somewhat broadly here, which is, I think everyone thinks of startups at various stages. We specialize in the super early where you're just starting, but then the startups grow up and these challenges remain all the way through to when they become public companies or acquired.
How do you see it? What interaction will clue me in that you have that emotional intelligence, that growth mindset, that humility, as well as that perseverance and grit?
Well, at a minimum, you can look at someone's arc at a career. So this person that I just spoke to, she started off as a computer science degree, went into data engineering, data science, then became a product marketer because she's like, yeah, it wasn't creative enough. And I didn't feel like we were representing the product well enough. So she kept pushing herself toward where she felt the problems existed in bringing product to market. She wasn't just, I just want to build. It was, we're building something really cool here and the world's not understanding it. And the marketers she was working with were just not getting it. So she ran into the breach to close it. That's the kind of attribute that you're looking for. Does this person do their job exceptionally well? Or do they run into breaches because they recognize there's a gap? That's the kind of attribute that is essential in early stage startups.
I love that a lot. Do they run into the breaches when there's a gap? And there are people that are satisfied staying on the other side
Yes.
and complaining about the gap.
Yes.
And there are others that try to discuss. And it's just a person, I don't know, but if you can coach some of those things. But I know that I see that often.
Yes.
Now, one of the things, Martina, that people often ask a question around is this idea of a co-founder.
Yes.
You know, like, when do I know I need a co-founder and what am I looking for in a co-founder? It kind of comes up often. How do you respond to that?
The answer is you need a co-founder. If only because being a founder is really, really lonely and hard if you're doing it all on your own. But at a minimum, you want someone that you feel is your intellectual equal that can push and press you and counterbalance some things because they're going to be hard decisions. Let's say you've been really successful in that early stage and you've just done pitches to a bunch of VCs and they're offering you very different things. One might be, will work alongside you, like hands-on and really, really help you. And another is just a really big brand, but it's just money. Which is the more important thing for you to grow? And you have to make a decision. There's no absolute right or wrong. It's about what you think works for you. And it's hard to make those types of decisions on your own. You will always benefit having a partner that's thinking through those things together with you. And all along the way, you'll have decisions like that. Is this the right executive team that we're bringing shape to? Does this person complement me? Like if I'm more technical, is this person stronger on the go-to-market side? So you want someone that complements your skill set, is not precisely the same with your skill set. Because then you're just covering more surface area of what is necessary to have on hand to build a successful startup. So yes, seek a co-founder 100% of the time. I have never advised that you don't need one. I have watched entrepreneurs make that decision for, I want more ownership, I want more control. I don't know anyone that's been happy with that decision. And in retrospect, they're like, I would have gladly given up control to have a little bit more of that balance. And I see it all the time when I'm working with founding teams, because I'll work with different co-founders at different times. And it's essential that they have different strengths.
Yeah. Now, besides the obvious legal, federal, state filing paperwork setup process that people go through, what's your typical first advice, for a startup founder? Like, what do you advise them to go do first? or go tackle first as they start up a company?
I think the biggest thing to tackle is, so there's product risk, which all the classic product discovery work that SVPG hammers again and again, like that never goes away. Always do that. That's table stakes. We'll just say the harder and less natural part for most people is to do that market de-risking and that market interrogation on a very consistent basis. But I actually believe you learn way more through that work than just the product discovery work. Or if you're doing product discovery, always include market discovery questions as a part of that. Okay, relative to, so let's say you put a bunch of prototypes in front of someone and just had them give you feedback on some of the basic ideas or concepts. Then ask, relative to the last piece of software that your team spent money on, how would something like this compare? Is there a budget that you could assign to this? Or what was that product and why did you adopt it? So I asked this question of someone that worked in the security team of Airbnb. And I was like, what was the most recent software purchase that you made? And she's like, oh, that was easy. It was Wiz. And I was like, well, how did you make that sale internally? She's like, it was so easy. I literally said, by turning this one thing on, we turned these 6 other things off. Fastest approval we ever got. And we love the product. And so that was very, very telling. So I went back to all of our security portfolio companies. I said, like Wiz right now is the fastest security company to get to $100 million in revenue in the shortest period of time. So that sets the bar. And so now we say, all right, use this as your comparison, which is what can you do so that someone can make as easy an argument for why you should be adopted, where it's like, turn us on, turn these things off so that you can be rapidly adopted.
I love that. I mean, we always say, you're solving for the product, solving for the market too. Like that goal is product market fit. One of the things that I often have to coach some startups, they get very distracted with so many things. It's like, we are working on multiple strategies. Maybe you want to grow our marketing department, sales department. I said, you don't have a product. You're like, what do you mean? Like, but we have a cool solution. I'm like, well, do you have a market for this product? What is the evidence that you found the smallest thing that addresses the needs of this market? And I often have to coach, strategically. There's only one focus for a startup by definition, which is getting product market fit. Everything else is an absolute distraction because many people, they almost draw out an org chart. They want the whole kingdom building of my this company, my marketing department, my sales department, my this. And I was like, there's only one focus, solve the problem. Yeah. And demonstrate a market.
Yeah, it's to the point where, so my partner Jim Wilson and I wrote a multi-part series called, we call it Market Product Fit, because there are all these counterintuitive things that are actually wildly essential. And a lot of people that come at this from the product background say, I'll get to that when I'm ready. And we just say, flip that entirely. Like all those questions and comments that I just talked about, those were all conversations with no product in hand. And those are all things that you could find out without even putting a product in front of people. But then you're value testing, saying, well, what would it need to be for it to be adopted? What problem is so burning hot in a security organization that they would say, we could argue, like, same argument we made for Wiz, we could make for something that did something like this. Then I know I can almost reverse engineer from market need and market budget and say, like, this is a Trojan horse that we can build into getting budget in a security organization.
I'm probably going to coach like that. If you have a product background, I'm going to coach you to get market product fit. If you have a marketing background, I'm probably coaching you to get...
Exactly. That's probably a really good way of talking about it. So Custonoa tends to back technical founders with builder backgrounds from combination of product and engineering. And so we are always coaching on the market side.
So, okay, scare me from doing a startup. Tell me why I should be terrified. And maybe on the flip side, after you've done that, excite me. Kind of, what are the pros and cons? Like, how would you be real about what I'm going to see or face out there?
Yeah, it's really hard. Building a product and actually bringing it to market is really, really hard. There are lots of frameworks and lots of people like to say like, oh, it's pretty formulaic. It's not. Every company and its market context shifts even as you're building. So one of our portfolio companies, they have been building product for about 18 months. And when they first wanted to announce the product, it's basically an agent that is the equivalent of a junior data scientist. And when they wanted to first talk about being an agent, the world didn't understand it. Like we pitched their story to TechCrunch and they're like, meh, it seems too niche because the world didn't have if you weren't in the data space, you didn't understand why the agentic approach was awesome. Fast forward less than 12 months later, Salesforce announces at Dreamforce the Agent Force. And so they have singularly moved the entire business landscape so that everyone is now asking for agents. And everyone that has an agentic approach to their product is benefiting from that. And this company saw that shift where they're like, we weren't getting a lot of follow-up calls from our demos. And since the fall, since Salesforce is doing this favor to everybody, almost 100% of our demos want a follow-up because the pull for agents now from the market is so strong. It's because somebody else that they had no control over did something. So the reason why I bring this up as an example of why this is hard, so much happens in a market that's beyond your control, irrespective of how great a product you're building, how well you build all the scaffolding. Markets are beyond your control. And it's like a class 5 rapid that you just have to navigate adeptly with whatever comes at you. So you just have to be prepared. It's not this easy, knowable journey. You just have to want to ride those waves. That works for some people. That's a little scary or feels unsafe or too risky for others.
Okay, what about the flip side? Excite me about what's the upside?
So if you just want like, hey, I just want to work 9 to 5 and I just want to be lifestyle oriented, I want quality of life is the single most important thing to me and control, that is not the startup life. But if you find that solving hard puzzles and constantly being forced to learn is energizing, then the startup life is for you. Or if you find yourself a little bored and you're like, I'm kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again, my work life is rinse and repeat, that's when you should consider looking at startups because they are not that. And I know for myself, I kind of made this discovery. So I obviously started my career at Microsoft, which was amazing as a place to learn. But even within 3 years, I was like, I'm kind of feeling a little rinse and repeat. It was like, this is when Office was, the big challenge, like, we want to go from 85% market share to 95% market share. And I was like, that's not an interesting problem. It's just like, we'll do more of the same. We'll throw more resources. I'm like, that's not fun. And this internet thing was happening. I was like, well, that's all new. That's uncharted waters. And I discovered for myself, I love creation. I love learning. It's so energizing for me. And the startup arena is all that. So it has been a wonderful place for me.
Oh, I love that. Now, if you're in a startup outside your co-founder, maybe, who is your first hire? Like, who are you looking to bring onto the team first? Where do you tend to see the first type of help you will need or support?
It totally depends very much on the kind of product and the space in which you are trying to build. So if you are trying to build a product that's in the security space, you're probably hiring engineers or people with security engineering backgrounds or outside of those technical engineers that are building the product. It might be a field CISO that actually knows and understands the market and can build community. So it's very, very contextual. Or it might be opportunistic where it's like, hey, this is the single best salesperson I ever worked with in my entire career. They happen to be in a career transition. It's really early for me to bring someone on sales, but they're so good, it's worth me taking this risk right now and bringing them on board because they're just awesome and they will all of a sudden stand up a function. They have the right DNA. They're kind of the maverick Davy Crockett type first sales rep that is ideal in a startup. And you just don't want to let that opportunity for that type of talent to go by. So it's a combination of need and opportunity in the ecosystem of talent that you know.
I want to make sure I turn to the other side of things with like joining a startup. Some people talk about the differences between working in a startup and working in an enterprise. As a career person, maybe trying to consider a career shift or go to another job, how do I assess that a startup is viable or that is worth joining? Like, what am I looking for?
Such a great question. So number one thing is the team. Who is the team in place? Like, are they strong? Are they great decision makers? Do they have proven track records? Or if they don't have proven track records, do they have some of those essential elements that we talked about as being important? The second is, what's the customer traction actually like? And it's not revenue, it's the quality of the revenue. There are startups out there that have junk revenue. They're like, oh, we were just able to get a couple $1 million of people that we were able to convince, but they're not going to retain. And companies can get all the way to $10 million and have a lot of not healthy revenue and customers in their system, which most people don't realize. They're like, oh, when you get to 10 million, surely everything is good. You might have had a really great sales team and you've got a lot of churn. So you actually have to look at the health of the customers. Are they retaining their customers? Are they good logos? You want to look at the health of the customer base and the pipeline. Like, how strong is that pipeline? And these are not questions that anyone teaches you to ask, but these are the types of questions that actually wind up being the most consequential in evaluating the potential of a startup that hasn't made it yet. Then are the backers. The backers are your proxy for that. So it's not just how much money have they raised, but what's the quality of the people backing them. I mentioned this earlier. There are funds that are very well known that are just money, that don't actually do as much detailed pressure testing of the founders and the market and all these other things. So you want to look at the backers and the quality of those backers and what that says about this company. And then I think just for yourself, you want to have some passion around the space. Like, don't just do it because there are a million rational reasons to do a startup for you, but you're not that passionate about the space. That's not fun for the whole rest of the team. In those early days, everyone should be passionate about what they're learning at the very least, if it's not the space that you know.
On one end, you're using the backers as a proxy for due diligence. Like if there's a good company backing it, they've done a lot of work
Yes.
to assess and test out their product market fit, their customer, their pipeline, their revenue, their strategy. So good backers or good investors as an indication that maybe there's something viable. But I love the passion for the problem space too, because, it's in startups, all the roles are fuzzy. Everybody does everything.
Yes.
Are there differences in the culture environment of a startup than, say, an enterprise or established company that people should be aware of as they're thinking about environment and cultures?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest distinctions between an established enterprise and an early stage startup is all established enterprises have these political undercurrents that are unavoidable in any organization of any kind of scale. It just happens naturally. It's human nature. It's not that, this is a very political place. It's like all places have political undercurrents that you just aren't aware of, that are hard to sometimes they're obvious, but other times they're less obvious and harder to know. So as you rise up in the ranks or as you spend more time there, you have to manage some of that organizational overhead. It's necessary. You have to be aware of it. You have to manage yourself through that, be it with mentors or other things. So that's a huge, big distinction. It's a skill to navigate that environment. And for some people, they really enjoy it. They enjoy amassing that power control, having lots of people report to them. That's exciting. There's huge organizational overhead with it, but they like having a large organization that they're responsible for. So that's a huge foundational difference. The expectations of control and organizational overhead, we'll just say. That's a foundational difference with a lot of early stage companies. There isn't as much.
You've had a chance to invest in startups, participate in startups, be part of evaluating them. What will inform you that a startup is likely to fail or it's likely to succeed? What clues you in quicker than anything else?
When they're selling a product, you use their sales and their customer traction as the indicator of that. That's because that's everything. It's kind of like, hey, we don't have ideas, but it's really when it hits the market, are people finding it valuable enough that they're converting to customers? So in that realm where you have a product that's in the market, we look at adoption and the speed of adoption, rate of adoption, and the quality of the customers that you attract. Once you have a product market, that's the thing that we look at. Prior to that, it is very much that mindset that I was talking about, which is how fast are these folks learning? Do they get stuck? Like there are teams that I meet with sometimes every other week, sometimes every week. Are the problems the same? Or is it a new problem that we're solving each time? So they yep, problem, solve, move on to the next one. Those that move quickly through problems and challenges and adapt really quickly, those are the ones that we know that are going to be winners. Those that move slowly or cling stubbornly to what they believe should be, those are destined for failure.
That's just pure gold. I often tell many startups, the number one reason you run out of money is you're not trying many things fast enough. People tell me, we were working on an MVP for 6 months, for 9 months. I'm like, what? I mean, if we know it takes you, I think most companies where we've studied, it's excess of 50 attempts to find something that works. If you're trying one thing in 6 months or 9 months, you can kind of see how many things you can try in a year and you will run out of money. I'm at a stage where people ask me, it's are you going to invest in my idea? And I'm like, no, I have probably gotten to a point in which I'm investing in the people more than the idea.
You are 100. That is the number one criteria for us.
Yeah.
We do not pass go if we do not believe in the people. Because like I mentioned, everything else can change. The product will change, the market will change, the space will change, but the people have to show that they are capable of operating in that environment. So you have to trust their ability to adapt. The people are number one by a long shot.
Yeah. Trust their ability to adapt, trust their grit, their perseverance, their growth mindset. Martina, this was a fun episode. I think we can talk about this for a whole day.
We could.
I really love this topic. I do get it a whole lot. I'm hoping people can kind of see your passion, your experience, your expertise come through around this topic. Thank you for joining me today and having this conversation on startup.
And I will just say, please consider this an invitation. If there are more topics around startups and startup life that people are curious about, like if I'm in a company, like whatever the questions are, please give us those questions. We would love to revisit them. We want this to be valuable for you.
Absolutely. Thank you again for being here, Martina.
Thanks, Christian.
Want to learn more? Until next time, please check out svpg.com, sign up for our newsletter that Maddie Kagan puts out, join us for one of our workshops near you, and get access to all of the articles and content we put out. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Until next time, have a good day.
A quick disclaimer, while this podcast is named Product Therapy, it is not hosted by licensed therapists or mental health professionals, and it is in no way a substitute for professional mental health services. We recognize the importance of mental well-being and encourage anyone facing personal difficulties to seek support from qualified professionals. See www.findahelpline.com.